Hello, everyone, and welcome to Intentional Insights Media. My name is Dr. Gleb Sapursky, and I'm here with a couple of people from Lifespan Research, which helps advance lifespan extension research in various ways. So I'll kick it over to them to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about what they do and why they think their work is important. Keith, do you want to introduce yourself and share with folks more about Lifespan and your own biography?
Sure. Hi, my name is Keith Comito. By trade, I'm a computer scientist and mathematician, but over the past couple of years, I've kind of crossed over into biotech with the help of a citizen science lab called GenSpace, which Oliver can talk about later. But as Oliver and I have both been interested in increasing healthy human lifespan, a few years ago we founded a nonprofit called the Life Extension Advocacy Foundation to basically help inform and engage the public about this research. And the first major initiative that we did last year was to launch Lifespan.io, which was a crowdfunding platform specifically for this research, which has been thankfully very successful so far. So far, 3 projects successfully under the belt, raising a total of over $170,000 at the moment for this research.
All right, thank you, Keith. And let's go on to Oliver, and he can tell us more about what he does.
Hi, Gleb. Is my audio coming in pretty clear?
Yes, it is.
Excellent. So Keith and I met a number of years ago at GenSpace. That's the community biotech lab that I helped co-found. Right now, so my interest in aging goes back to when I was a PhD student at Harvard. So my work was focusing on genetic pathways that regulate aging in response to calorie restriction. That was with the Sinclair lab. Currently, right now, I'm a director of the biomedical engineering lab at Cooper Union, which is a college, an engineering, arts, and architecture college down in Lower Manhattan. And for the past year and a half, as Keith mentioned, we basically decided to, get together, start a nonprofit organization that helps raise public awareness for aging. And one of the affiliates that we launched is a website, Lifespan.io, which is actually crowdfunding aging research right now as we speak.
Excellent. Thank you, Oliver. So I had a question to ask about Lifespan.io and more broadly about the nature of aging research and funding it. I know that there's a lot of problems with getting funding from traditional sources for lifespan aging research, especially to extend the human lifespan. And that seems strange to me. It seems like everyone would like to live as long and as healthy life as possible and, ideally be young and healthy forever to the extent that it's possible. So why is there this resistance, and why do individual crowdsourcing projects need to be created as opposed to having the government or other universities fund this stuff? So Keith, maybe you can take this and then kick it over to Oliver for anything he can add.
Sure. I think the problem there with funding up until this point for aging research kind of has to do with sort of the narrative arc of biomedical research itself up until now. It's been very sort of disease-focused and siloed, and that's also the way that you kind of apply for grant money. You can't just, up until now, say, I want a government grant to solve aging. You have to say, oh, it's Alzheimer's disease or it's heart disease. It's a branch of a branch instead of working on the trunk of the tree. So I think where we're at kind of right now, and I'm sure Oliver can speak to this point, is researchers starting to kind of wake up to the point that there's this shared process that can be directly attacked. And by doing so, by putting your money there, you will have a much bigger net effect if your goal is to help improve the healthy lifespans of a large amount of people. So we're kind of on the vanguard of that, but I do think that the mainstream biotech industry will follow suit at some point. Oliver, maybe you can fill that in a little bit.
Yeah, Oliver, please.
Yeah, well, getting grants, getting funding is tricky in the best of times. I don't think it's, all the points that Keith made are accurate. But funding is tight for a whole bunch of other subjects as well. And I think in general, the loudest bird gets the worm. Everybody has their own own thing that they need to fund, their own specific disease model, and like he said, attacking the trunk of the tree, which basically would tackle all of these diseases, would be the way to go. But the getting most of the researchers on board, that's been taking a while. Just everything requires time when it comes down to this type of paradigm shift, and certainly people in the aging field have known this for a long time, but it's just to me it's human nature. It's less to do with specifically a problem with aging per se versus there not being enough money around and everybody needs to fund their pet project. But it's hard to convince people that to fund aging research per se, you're going to help all of these other fields as well. Everybody has their own turf, so to speak, to try to defend.
I think that's really great that you brought up the problem of human nature, because that's a lot of what we focus on in Intentional Insights, or we popularize research in psychology, behavioral economics, cognitive neuroscience, and other fields that helps us understand how we think and how we feel and how we behave and why we make decisions that are not sometimes effective to reach our goals. There's problems like status quo bias, where people think that the status quo as it is right now is fine, and they don't sufficiently think that things can be changed and things can be better. And it's hard to change things, but things can be so much better often if we do change them. And issues like scope neglect, where we neglect the actual possibility of the impact of what we're doing by engaging in aging research. So not considering how much benefit we can get. Another one is hyperbolic discounting, where we are focusing too much on the short term and not thinking nearly enough about the wonderful long-term outcomes that can come out of anti-aging research for everyone involved. I don't know if Oliver, you can speak to that in the research field, and Keith, you can speak to that more in the crowdfunding field, kind of how you've engaged with this. So let me take it over to Oliver first and then to Keith.
So what is the question? What is the psychological makeup of the research field?
Well, I think status quo, how the inertia of research is a factor here, I think, would relate to this.
Well, again, coming down to, humans being humans, the inertia to me is understandable because, everybody picks something to research and you become an expert in what you're researching. And it's just, if you're really already passionately interested in some subsection of biology which has overlap with aging. Let's say you're looking at cancer biology and a certain subset of cancer biology which may involve bioinformatics and diagnostics of a particular series of mutations that lead to a specific cancer. You're already focusing a lot of your energies on tackling this one problem. And scientists, just like everybody else, are focusing on their own, their own subsection of whatever they've chose to research, and that takes a lot of time. So, biology isn't, there are core, connections in biology, like, evolution by natural selection, that all biologists subscribe to. And it'd be nice to maybe get some other things, put in there for all biologists to subscribe to, for example, such as, aging. But, since we don't yet have a very firm theoretical grounding on aging, I think that, it's up to the aging researchers to establish that first, and then you'll start seeing more scientists get online, because if I'm not exactly in that field, I'm not going to really invest too much of my research time trying to figure out what's really going on, because I've got my own problems to tackle. Right. So as an aging researcher, you're biased into thinking, well, this is a problem that all of life shares. So why doesn't every biologist, take a look at this? But again, we don't have a good theoretical model right now. We have several models, but we don't have a model in which there's a consensus where everybody could say, okay, this is where all the evidence is pointing. I think we're getting there, and I think we might be there probably shorter than we think, in a matter of years. But I think until that happens, until you have that Charles Darwin-like synthesis of what this is all about, it might be a little too premature to expect to see a lot of other researchers outside of the aging field jump on that bandwagon. That's my 2 cents.
All right. Thank you for your 2 cents. So, Keith, can you talk about more broadly what you see as the impact of these cognitive biases that I mentioned in the aging field?
Sure, it's a super good question, and I'm going to try to hit all the ones that you mentioned there. So first, kind of starting with the status quo bias, I think what sort of works against us at the moment is there's a status quo bias for, in some cases, discredited kind of researcher ideas from hundreds of years ago. For example, the idea of overpopulation running rampant and being a big problem that goes back to Thomas Malthus in 1790. He had that whole idea of the doubling rates, and every 16 years or whatever, the population is going to double. We're going to zoom past the carrying capacity of the Earth, and everyone's going to die. But if you look at population demographics, that fear just never borne out. In fact, in many developed countries, the population is starting to level off and even crash in some cases, like in Japan. So that's, for example, that's probably one of the major 2 knee-jerk reactions that we get when we try to engage the public is, oh, what about overpopulation? Because people are still thinking, like, that has become so cemented in, like, the societal unconscious that it's a real thing, but it's not. It's just based off of essentially junk science. So there's a real kind of one example of old status quo that still affects us. But to talk about some other cognitive biases, so when we try to engage the public, if we try to just tell people what to think and say, oh, no, that's wrong. Thomas Malthus was wrong. This is right. You're going to run into the backfire bias, which is, I'm not sure how much you talk about it on your show, but that's when, you present some information that contradicts someone's ignorance, and then they believe the first thing even more because they don't want to accept a challenge to their credibility. So it all becomes, how can we be truthful, but also structure our narrative in such a way that can get by the backfire bias. And this also involves getting by things like scope neglect and the identifiable victim effect. So, for example, this is what the early cancer advocates did in the 40s with the Jimmy Fund with cancer. They realized that the public's not really going to get behind this amorphous idea of cancer. It's something I can deal with later in my life. It's not going to affect me. So, it's the victim there isn't identifiable. It's amorphous, so people can't get an emotional attachment to it. But they picked this one boy, Jimmy. His name was actually Gustav, I think. And they built this whole PR thing around it. How can you help save this boy, Jimmy? And therefore, they directly leapfrogged over the identifiable victim bias and the scope neglect bias and really affected everybody emotionally. And that triggered the cascade that became the war on cancer. So I think that's a very interesting model for our movement to look at.
Excellent. Thank you, Keith. And you might want to check your video cam because I think it was out for a bit, but I think it's back right now.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So, great. So I wanted to build up on top of that and hear what you two have found to be motivating for crowdfunding from the broad population. So we talked about how there's trouble getting big money from governments, from universities, that researchers are focused within their silos and they have difficulty shifting, and the money has difficulty shifting. So why should Joe Public, who cares about aging and who doesn't want to die and who wants to be healthy and young forever, why should she or he donate to anti-aging research? So let's start with Oliver and then go to Keith.
Well, fundamentally, taking the long view, obviously, why you should invest in this, because it's going to directly impact you. And I think why people are choosing to invest in the projects. Well, invest is not a good word, and why they're choosing to donate to the projects is, I think one of the reasons, at least for me, is that we have projects, right? It's not just, you're not donating to kind of an anonymous or amorphous institution, right? You directly engage with the researchers, you know exactly what they're working on, and there's this direct connection between the researcher and the person that's going to be donating the funds. To me, I see that as a big draw, because you can now interact directly with the researcher, and the science itself becomes very, very personal, very, very one-on-one. And, I think, I hope that that's a factor for, why we're seeing, such positive responses, from our website and the funding that's going into the particular projects. And I think it just happens to be that a lot of the people that are being affected by our site, that are going and donating to these wonderful projects, already have the large picture in mind. Already have the big picture in mind. It'd be interesting to maybe take a poll of them and find out, what they think, could be done to kind of influence, or the rest of the public into having the same, I guess, passion or views that they are having when it comes to looking at these projects. Maybe there would be some great ideas we can take home from that.
Yeah, that sounds like a good project for you guys to do. Okay, Keith, so same question to you, and kind of building up on top of what Oliver was saying.
Sure. So obviously, I agree with everything that Oliver said. Another angle that I like to think of, and I try to put forth in social media posts and such when I'm trying to engage the public here, is that, and again, in addition to just straight helping the research and being involved, like Oliver is saying, I think it's important to see what we're doing here as part of a larger social movement, and that has a lot of powerful secondary effects that we try to let people know about as they're happening. For example, because of the success of the crowdfunding projects and because they're so visible, we are building relationships with YouTube celebrities that want to engage the public on this topic, or we're going to conferences at Google and meeting a lot of big players, people who are interested, who want to hear our input on how the system can change, how we can help the big money get to, how do we get government money released, right? How do we get the billions of dollars released, like what happens for cancer? Well, if you can get a lot of positive buzz behind some credible research projects, and then government and companies can see that people are interested in this and that it's viable, that sort of changes the game. And another sort of thing related to this is, as a side effect of what we've been doing, we've also been contacted by investors that have been looking to invest in companies that we've worked with, or similar companies, and we've been sort of matchmaking behind the scenes. So in addition to all the great stuff that's happening on the surface level, there's a lot of things going on the other side of the iceberg as well that are very powerful and have happened in a short amount of time. So it really gives me optimism that things are starting to change here.
That's great to hear. I'm really pleased to hear about this stuff under the iceberg, which, I can only observe the stuff that's on the tip of the iceberg, and it's really neat to hear that there's these beneficial things going on underneath. I wanted to ask more about the stuff that people would be visible to people, so that people can see. What would be your dream scenario for the transition in the narrative arc, how people should think differently, including all these cognitive biases that we talked about, how researchers should think differently, how the government should think differently about aging, and what would be the positive outcome of doing so? So Oliver first, and then Keith.
Huh. Oh, that's a big question. How should they think differently? Well, certainly, certainly they should start getting used to, thinking about long term. The long term impacts of what we're doing and the time that we're going to have available to us. I mean, our average lifespan has been increasing considerably. More and more people are able to reach, the centenarian stages of life. And if we're correct about breakthroughs that are on the horizon, and I think we are, and if certain theories of aging really start to consolidate and lead us in the right direction, then we will have aging as one less thing to worry about as something that kills us, right? And that's something I want to emphasize. We're not speaking of immortality here or anything very very kind of esoteric like that. It's just essentially living as long as you can, as healthy as you can for as long as you can, right? Which basically translates to not dying of aging or not having an internal clock. And that's something that people are going to have to wrap their heads around if they want to partake in that, right? And what does that now mean when it comes to certain initiatives, when it comes down to what we're trying to achieve as a society, right? I mean, right now we have 5-year plans and we have, we imagine things maybe 10 years from now, but can we have 100-year plans? Can we have 500-year plans? I mean, that's something that's kind of unfathomable now, but I don't know, we might have to look back into the past to get those ideas back because, I remember, reading articles about how people would plan for, renovating a manor house after 300 years by planting a forest, and this was already expected that the forest would grow, and after 200-300 years they would have the beams ready to renovate the dwelling. And this was in the Middle Ages, so people were thinking in times of in lengths of time spans and planning for it, planning for 200-year 300-year projects, right? So what has happened since then, right? So in one sense, we're really advanced, but at the same time, at a cost of really having an extremely short-term, view as towards history. And it seems kind of oxymoronic that the more advanced we've become, the more short-term our thinking has become. And if we go back into the past, the complete opposite has been the case. You had shorter average lifespans, but way longer-term thinking and way longer-term planning. So, could we reconcile the best of both worlds? Can we have the long-term planning of the past combined with the highly sophisticated science of the present and the future? So that would be interesting to see how that can be bridged.
Excellent. I really like that vision. What about you, Oliver? What about you, Keith? What do you think?
Sure. First, I want to say it's funny because I'm usually the one coming in from the philosophical angle, so Oliver surprised me there. Very cool stuff. I want to piggyback on that to start. Yeah, I agree exactly with what Oliver was saying. I would love to see more longer-term thinking, and I feel like it is useful to go back to look at the past and remember our history. For example, the Epic of Gilgamesh, the first great work of literature our species has produced, is all about a quest to overcome the diseases of aging and death. And as sort of kind of a societal-wide or a representation of a sublimation that society has done, all kind of later epics like Beowulf and that kind of thing, they go after some sort of metaphor of that in a sense, like fame or living on through your children or good works or that kind of thing, terror management theory, what you can do to live on given the fact that you can't remain healthy and young and live in perpetuity. So I think that's, again, very useful how in ancient times, in a sense, there was a lot more thinking about these ideas and what that might actually mean, the thing itself as well, not just metaphors. But As far as just what I would like to see, I'm going to start out idealistically here and then sort of go into policy, is what I would love to see is it not be shameful for someone to say that they want to do whatever it is they do in perpetuity. If they're a ballerina and they're 40 years old and they want to still dance, it shouldn't be like, she's trying to do, young people stuff. No, I think people should be allowed to choose to do to follow their bliss, to be a little bit cliche. And I want to see a society where people aren't ashamed to love life and to want to preserve that in themselves and in those that they love. And I think as part of that, there also needs to be a societal wide movement to re-engage older populations. I think, at least in America, I find that the way that we treat our elderly is that's what's shameful. You just kind of put them away, don't talk about them, put them in nursing homes, and let them just waste away. Where I feel like if we can, as a synergy with research that will help keep them more vital, being able to bring them back into society, to retrain them to do something else, to have them engaged, for us to all benefit from their wisdom, I think that would be a huge boon to society. And I think also another important point in this conversation is that I believe that if we all are living longer and healthier, that will be a boon for the innovation of society and will get us to Mars faster, will get us to sustainable living faster. Imagine, for example, if just take one person, Nikola Tesla, had 10 more healthy, productive years. I think the whole world might be different. We might have wireless electricity, no global skirmishes over oil, and that's just one person. So I feel like we could do a better job of not doing the stereotype stuff, like the Terminator, AI takeover, singularity type stuff. I think there might be a place for that, but I don't think that's a thing we should be pushing. We should be pushing that this is a really exciting time to be alive, and we can allow people to have wonderful choices in perpetuity, and that actually will be a societal benefit. It's not selfish. It's great for everybody. And I think that's what I would like to see.
Well, I think you two outlined wonderful visions. So now I want to go from the super, super broad to the very, very specific and ask each of you to describe a favorite project that was funded by Lifespan Co. So one of you take one project and then one of you take another. So how do we concretely make those wonderful visions that you described true through the specific things people can do and people can fund? Oliver, starting with you.
That's a dangerous question because we have that's three projects. So if I pick one and you pick one, there's going to be one person out.
Okay, well.
So.
Well, we had two projects from SENS, right? So if you pick one from SENS and one of us picks the other one, then we should be okay.
There you go.
Gee, it's really hard to pick a favorite. It's like having kids.
Sure. What do you think let's go with what do you think would most surprise people? If you don't want to go with favorite, I understand that you might not want to choose a favorite. What would be most surprising?
I could start off if you like, Oliver.
All right, go ahead.
Sure. The one that I found personally most interesting was the one from SENS to back up the mitochondrial DNA into the nucleus, because that is something that sounds so like it's the perfect balance to me of something people have heard of, like in high school, in cell biology, they know what the mitochondria is, but then you're combining it with this thing that sounds like some radical, crazy thing. Like we're taking DNA from somewhere and making a backup in the cell nucleus where it never was, and it sounds very exciting and crazy and sounds like something that would be far off. And then here's this experiment that they were successful in. They recently published their paper. They were able to back up, I believe, one of the 13 that they're trying to migrate. So for those of you who don't know, basically, mitochondria has its own DNA, and because the mitochondria is kind of like a nuclear reactor, damage there can cause problems and accelerate aging. So what SENS wanted to do was take some of that DNA there, and back it up in the bomb shelter of the nucleus, so there'll be another copy of it to produce the proteins that need to be made, et cetera, et cetera. Oliver can correct me if I'm wrong on that. But basically, it sounds something so sci-fi, but here it is. And another interesting side of that too is that in addition to being kind of sci-fi, it also is quote unquote natural, because this process of backing up the mitochondrial genome in the nucleus is something that's been slowly happening over evolution. There's just 13 genes or whatever that haven't quite made the trip yet. So in a sense, SENS was trying to finish the job that evolution has already started. So it's exciting, it's novel, but also totally fits into this natural context. So I think it's a very interesting project for that reason.
All right. Well, I guess, Oliver, you have only one project left to pick.
Well, I actually was thinking about the same project for those same reasons. And also I was going to mention that it was kind of a neat project because not only is it radical in that, hey, you're moving the genome from one, organelle into the nucleus, and it's finishing what evolution started, but it also would be a test bed for the hypotheses that SENS has regarding the importance of mitochondria in aging. If they are correct, then moving all the chromosomes or all the genes, mitochondria, into the bomb shelter of the nucleus should cause these cells to be much healthier, right? To live to have less degradation. So. I mean, this is a very clear-cut prediction, right? So it's a very, so I like the experiment from a scientific perspective also, because there is a very clear prediction to be made. Either the stability of these genes and the stability of mitochondria is important, and moving them to the nucleus will make the cells, much healthier, or it's not. Right, so but in science you don't always get clear-cut answers. There's always maybes and perhaps. So we'll see what the data bears out. But there is, I like the fact that scientifically you have something that's falsifiable here, right? That when you do this experiment, it's going to tell you something in the end.
Okay, yeah, I really like those sorts of experiments also because. Yes, then you can actually know. So something that we at Intentional Insights often advocate for people in their lives is to experiment and try things out and see if it works for you and see if it doesn't, with various cognitive biases and various strategies to overcome them, and gather data beforehand and afterward and see how things change. So it's really great that there's a model that can be addressed here, and I'm pleased to hear that even if the experiment proves not successful in terms of the cells don't live longer, then you can exclude that, and then you don't have to work down that pathway. And that's something that people often don't realize is maybe even more beneficial than an experiment that goes like maybe that works or maybe it doesn't, because then you don't have to bother with that pathway further. All right, Oliver, do you want to describe the nonsense experiment?
The nonsense experiment.
Yes.
Oh, nonsense, not nonsense.
That's right.
Oh, nonsense.
Yes. The one that's not from sense. Mm-hmm.
Right. So the major mouse testing program. That's so we have a couple of other projects that will be launched that are also nonsense. But the MMTP project. This is basically sort of like a large mouse screen amongst many different laboratories where they're essentially going to be testing not only single compounds but combinations of compounds, and doing the lifespan analyses on these mice. And essentially it's a large-scale mouse screen for compounds that I think the ones they're initially starting off with have been FDA approved for other indications. So that sort of lowers the barrier to entry for use as a therapeutic. And the whole goal basically here is, okay, so these things have been shown to have beneficial effects. Now, what do they do for average and maximal lifespan, right? So this is essentially what the major mouse testing program is. And as these compounds come in, they're going to be fed into this pipeline and fed to the mice as well, and measurements are going to be made. So I think the long-term goal would that this would be sort of like an industrial scale mouse testing program to see if, which compounds out there make mice live the healthiest and, out of everything that's coming out there. So that's the essence of it, I think.
That's an exciting project as well, because hopefully we can get those into humans later on. So yeah, that's excellent as well. So now I want to chat a little bit about your personal passions and what motivated you to get into this. And I'll share why I'm passionate about this. From personal perspective, it would be nice to live as long and healthy life as I possibly can, so that I don't die from aging and, die from a bike accident or something like that. So hopefully I can have as long and healthy life as possible. Now, that's one thing, but more broadly, I am really concerned with human flourishing as a whole. That's a huge part of why I started up Intentional Insights, intentionalinsights.org, so to promote research-based thinking, feeling, and behavior patterns and help people have the best lives possible. Because from my personal perspective, these are the most fundamental problems that obstruct our ability to live the best lives that we can and make the best possible decisions that we can. So that's what I'm really passionate about. I want people to have the best lives possible, and I see dealing with aging as a really important part of that. And dealing with aging, in part, is impeded by problematic thinking patterns that we talked about, the status quo bias, hyperbolic discounting, not thinking about the long term. That's the hyperbolic discounting one, confirmation bias, and so scope neglect, and so on. So that's my passion. Now I want to turn it over to first Keith and then Oliver to describe your passion, why you're passionate about this stuff.
Sure. The reason why I'm passionate about life extension research is partly for the reasons that you said, is that I just feel that logically and rationally it will maximize the good for every person in all of society if we can live longer and healthier and remain vital. But to sort of I'll spin this into kind of I have a very kind of broad view of things that might be a little strange, but I'll just say it so you can get a sense of my overall picture. I don't really talk about it much, but for me, I'm very kind of concerned with meaning and philosophical concerns. And I guess I kind of had like an existential crisis in my early 20s, where I was spending a lot of time training in martial arts and doing all this kind of physical stuff. And I had a thought, I'm putting all this time into this meat, right, where at some point Father Time is just going to completely invalidate that. And not only is that true for me, it's true for everybody. And not only is it true just for the physical, because I started to think, all kind of the social structures or the psychological tricks or coping mechanisms that people have to kind of deal with the crushing fact that you're going to die, terror management theory, I realize rely on some sort of immortality of the species, if not of the person, right? Even if you're going to die, you're going to live on through your children, you're going to live on through your good works, or some way that, your existence has affected the universe, even in a mystical kind of sense, right? But, if you kind of take it all the way to the end of entropy heat death of the universe or something like that, where there's no life, no memory of life, no nothing, just at the end, blackness. It's kind of like watching a movie, and at the end of the movie, you get that little text blip that just says, and then everybody died and nothing mattered. If you watched the movie like that, you'd feel horrible. Right. And I realize, in some sense, that's kind of like where we are existentially. So what I would love to do is sort of increase the pace of human progress so that we can do things like get off the Earth before an asteroid destroys it, leave the solar system before the sun explodes, and maybe one day, trillions of years in the future, figure out a way to exist beyond entropy heat death. So, because I feel like meaning, in some sense, whether we think about it or not, is sort of predicated on that tacit belief that something goes on, right? So I want that for all humanity. I want that sense that things will go on to be true. So I think that by working on life extension, that will accelerate our pace of knowledge, of learning, of discovery, in addition to all of the humanitarian things that I 100% am for as well. Like my kind of master plan about all of this is that I want us to flourish and survive and, be healthy and happy in perpetuity as a species, if nothing else.
Well, that's a wonderful long-term plan. What about you, Oliver?
Well, I guess I could just distill it down to, one simple concept is that, I'd like for us, and by, for us meaning humanity, including myself, of course, to just have more options, right? More options available to us. So, I mean, that certainly comes down to a sense of human liberty, right? So if to me, that's the whole point of scientific progress. That's the whole point of technology, is all of this technology, gives us options to do things that we didn't have in the past. For example, we're having this call right now, this teleconferencing call. And, this technology just a few generations ago would have been just, unheard of, unthinkable, and here it is, and we're complaining about minor issues now, like, oh, there's a glitch here, it's the feed is a little slow, but I mean, to me, medical progress, especially not having to worry about aging, that's just yet another option, albeit a huge option, that you can offer humanity as far as personal choices are concerned. And it's a big one, right? Because now you have the ability to, you've essentially given one of the most powerful things to people, actually two of the most powerful things at once, which is health and time, right? So out of all the things that we talk about being the most precious to humanity, health and time are probably the top two, I would think. And having aging as one less thing to worry about, really takes care of those top two, issues. At least, health as or unhealthiness as being a consequence of degeneration of your health through, inner mechanisms, having that not being something to worry about. I mean, that opens up so many options to humanity. And I'm just going to leave it as options, right? People can choose to do good things and bad things with their options. But to me, the more options available to a society, to me, that's really that's really the direction of progress, essentially.
Okay. Yes, the progress on both parts and different perspectives on the longer term progress kind of versus the options, and wonderful to have both. I really like the idea of thinking about glitches. I'd love for there to be a future in the near term when we can talk about, oh, there's a minor glitch in my treatment versus not having the concept of anti-aging treatment at all. So at this point, I'd like you to turn to each of you to leave the viewers with any final thoughts and remind them where they can find out more information about anti-aging research, lifespan.co, and other venues. So first, over to Keith and then to Oliver.
Sure. I mean, the main thing that I would like to leave everybody with is that, the present and the future are super exciting. We live in an amazing time, and never delude yourself into inaction by thinking that everyone's got it all figured out, or there's no place for you to make a contribution. Every organization that I know, from the largest to the smallest, needs help, needs people to be involved. So if you think that this is an interesting idea, you want to learn about it, by all means, contact me or Oliver. Go to lifespan.io. Just read about it, learn about it, because I think the future needs us. Not to make it heavy, but every day 100,000 people die of aging, and some of those people, to Oliver's point, might want that choice to spend a few extra years with their grandchildren. And if you can move this technology up by whatever you do by one day, that's 100,000 people that you're affording that choice to. So I think that is huge and empowering. So that's the main thing that I want to leave people with. It's an exciting and wonderful time to be alive, and we can do amazing things together. So help if you can.
And Oliver?
Yeah, well, I mean, now more than ever, I mean, because of the internet, people have a lot of opportunities to read about this research, right? So one thing that we're trying to do at Lifespan.io and Leaf is to basically become essentially a one-stop shop for all things that are going on in the aging community. So having lists of conferences that are coming up all the time, because there's conferences taking place in most cities, around the world, where you can listen to the top researchers discuss the latest, breakthroughs. Having available the publications that are coming out right now with regards to aging research and some of the theories that are being hashed out. I mean, all of this is available online. Not just on Lifespan.io, but many other science websites. So if people are really interested in this, they should go to these sites and read up on some of the latest, technological advances that are happening, the latest scientific hypotheses that are being hashed out, and get engaged. And one way they can get engaged is to come to our site and actively contribute to the research that's going to make us live healthier and longer than we've ever done before.
Wonderful, and I think that's a really good call to action, and I hope all the viewers who haven't yet had a chance to go to lifespan.io will do so and research this stuff and consider contributing to one of the projects there. Well, this has been another Intentional Insights Media interview, and thank you both for participating. Have a good night, all.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.